With a confusing business model and a lackluster library, Stadia didn't exactly inspire a lot of confidence. But there were still a few people who had faith in Google's ability to build a finished product, and those were the ones that were blindsided when Google decided to pull the plug. When Stadia came out 3 years ago, it was supposed to turn the game industry upside down. There were claims of it being more powerful than the Xbox One and the PS4 combined. And with names like Jade Raymond, Tequila Works, Bethesda, Typhoon Studios, we were almost hopeful, but 3 years later, here we are. According to a blog post from Phil Harrison, who is the big man for Google, the service is going to be shutting down on the 18th of January 2023. Maybe you're a cynic, maybe you thought this day was going to come sooner or later. But even inside Google's own camp, it's not like employees had the full picture. This came as a surprise to everyone, even within Google's ranks, because they released a new game and a new web app redesign on the same day that Stadia was going to shut down. And apparently, Phil Harrison sent out an email at 7 a.m. to hold a meeting about Stadia shutting down at 8:30. So apparently, from the employee's perspective, imagine clocking into work and realizing that your workplace is going to be shutting down in like 45 minutes. Even worse, it seems like Stadia actually didn't let developers in on this announcement earlier either. Gulfire Studios founder James Simpson talked about this in an interview with Kotaku. He talked about how they recently had communication with their partner manager and they were actually going on with some next steps in the development process, and there was really no indication that anything was going to be changing. Mike Rose, the founder of No More Robots, tweeted, "Hours later and I still have no email from Stadia and no clarity on what's happening with our games, deals, anything. Really would have been nice if they told partners or even got in contact with us by now." No More Robots had a game called Heist Simulator due to come out of early access in 2023. According to Rebecca Heineman, the tech icon working at Old Skull, Google did reach out to ask about the budgets they had for specifically developing the Stadia version of the games they had. So this could be an indication that Google is planning to reimburse people for the time and money they spent on developing those versions. But that's a lot of reimbursements. Could Google even pay all of its developers? According to an interview with Heineman, she said, "If other devs out there don't get reimbursed or they don't get their money back, they're dead." Now, Stadia might not be going down in history as the gaming platform, but at least it's going to reimburse its users. With the announcement of the shutdown, Google promised that they would be refunding everything bought through the Stadia store, which includes games, content, DLCs, whatever. And this is a great move by Google because nobody that invested in Stadia early on is going to feel foolish for investing in an ambitious product. From what we know, all refunds are going to be completed around mid-January. But of course, the big question is, how did it get to this in the first place? If you were around when Stadia first launched, you probably remember how much of a nightmare it was. There were a lot of missing features from the get-go. There was no 4K, there was no 5.1 surround, there was no state share, Stream Connect, crowd play, none of that. And don't even get us started on the input lag. Digital Foundry was able to find that if you go on resolution mode on Shadow of the Tomb Raider on Stadia, the input lag would be over 200 milliseconds. And for the unacquainted, that means that there's a 200 millisecond delay every time you press the button versus when it appears on the screen, so you can imagine that it's pretty difficult to play with that. On top of that, the claims about Stadia having 4K and 60 FPS, you can forget about those too because Digital Foundry was able to discover that those were kind of lies. Destiny 2 was locked to 1080p, and if you played Red Dead Redemption 2 with Chromecast Ultra, then the quality would fall to 1440p. But why were there problems in the first place? According to some former employees, the upper management didn't exactly understand the critique that was coming their way. One of the ex-employees laid this out in an IGN interview. They said, "We, on the gaming side, were basically ignored. I think there was very much a Google way of doing things that the gaming side understood, but didn't see as applicable to what we were doing on Stadia." On top of that, we can't exactly ignore how Stadia planned on making money. They wanted players to buy games individually rather than having this sort of one-stop solution like a Netflix of games, which would have arguably been a lot more feasible if you're trying to do something on the cloud. On top of that, they had very fierce competitors. If you've got Sony, if you've got Xbox who have insane libraries, it's going to be really difficult to find some footing in this kind of market. I mean, no Fortnite, no Minecraft, that's a lot of money makers that are missing in the market. Additionally, there were some strange bumps in the road as well because, for example, Andrew Spinks, also known as Red Digit in the Terraria community, was locked out of Terraria's official Google accounts and he was not helped by Google. And based off of this experience, he stated, "I absolutely have not done anything to violate your terms of service, so I can take this no other way than you deciding to burn this bridge. Consider it burned. Hashtag Terraria for @Google Stadia is cancelled. My company will no longer support any of your platforms moving forward." He added, "I will not be involved with a corporation that values their customers and partners so little. Doing business with you is a liability." Now, one of the biggest blows to Stadia came in early 2021. They shut down all of their internal studios, cancelled all the in-progress games, and also laid off 150 employees. Apparently, Google wasn't exactly giving its developers the creative freedom that is conducive to this entire process of making games. It was asking developers to make prototypes that would make Stadia's technology look good, rather than working on what they actually wanted to do. Inside sources also revealed that Google wasn't funding games to sell games, it was funding games to sell Stadia. And the icing on the cake for this situation is that Stadia, despite spending millions of dollars making games like Red Dead Redemption, Assassin's Creed, and Cyberpunk 2077 happen on the Stadia, it was still missing its mark by hundreds of thousands when it came to selling controllers and getting monthly active users. Despite this, the studios fared on, and in January, even got some praise from Phil Harrison in an email, which said, "Stadia Games and Entertainment had made great progress building a diverse and talented team and establishing a strong lineup of Stadia exclusive games. Nothing like praise from the boss." But 5 days later, after the email, the ground was pulled beneath everyone's feet because Phil Harrison closed down the internal studios, and apparently, Phil Harrison knew about the studios having to be shut down at the time of the email. They even pulled out the big guns and they acquired Typhoon Studios, a Montreal-based studio. But despite all of this talent, Google simply couldn't put the resources to good use. One source said, "Google is really an engineering and technology business. Making content, it requires types of roles that don't typically exist at Google." On that note, Stadia's biggest problem was probably that they overpromised and were not able to deliver. In another testimony, one of the employees said, "I question how much XX above Stadia leadership understand what they got into, the commitments made and the overcommitments and the inability to keep to those commitments." More on this story though, back in January, Google apparently deprioritized the platform. And according to a report from Business Insider, less than 20% of the team was actually working on the streaming service, and the rest were working in tech sales. More specifically, selling the new tech to third parties under the name Google Stream. And let's be honest, that makes sense because Stadia wasn't really getting anywhere as a gaming platform. Anyone with two brain cells rubbing together could tell that this was a last-ditch effort from Google to try and save the platform, because according to a report from Business Insider, Google was trying to sell some of the streaming tech to Capcom so that they could essentially stream demo titles directly from the company website. Reports of a similar deal with Bungie came forward, but with Sony's $3.6 billion acquisition of the video game company, it's not yet clear if the deal went through or not. At the end of the day though, Amazon, Microsoft, Nvidia, they've all had some good success with cloud gaming platforms, but for Google, this is just another really expensive experiment. And that is it for today's video, and before I log off, there's this beautiful piece of cake that is coincidentally the same color as the subscribe button, just to remind you to click it, so go ahead. Goodbye.